All right, hey guys. Thanks for joining me today at MiniCon. We're just going to dive right into this. Um, I just want to go back because the joke's already been dropped. So what we're talking about today is Authentication Unpacked. What does MSAL actually do? The working title for this session was also handwritten auth. Sometimes the wrong thing is still wrong. Hopefully my view on writing your own authentication solutions is clear at this point, as I've been talking about this for quite some time. Many thanks to the sponsors, as always. You know, they make these things possible. Obviously, the MiniCon wouldn't be here without the help from the sponsors of PSConf.eu. So make sure you go and hang out at their booths if you can. And if you haven't already said hi to them, definitely go and do that. Okay, just a little quick about me. So for anyone that doesn't know, my name is Ben. I work at PatchMyPC as a DevOps senior engineer type person. I try to come up with a fun name every year. So today I'm a text editor because we've automated quite a lot of our tasks. So really what I'm doing is sort of going into YAML files and just making sure that they look pretty, making sure that we're using tabs, not spaces. I also, speaking of tab, not spaces, put all of my code, including the code you're going to see on today, in my GitHub profile, which is at tabs, not spaces. I periodically write blogs at powers-hell.com, and I only ever use social media at Blue Sky, also at powershell.com. I'm very rarely on there, but if you want to get in contact with me, GitHub, my blog, and Blue Sky are the best places to go. Okay, really quick agenda. So we're going to do a quick recap on MSAL. It's 2025 at this point. I'm especially the highly skilled people that we are in this room today. I'm fairly confident everyone understands what MSAL is, but we're just going to do a really quick sort of review of that, and then we're going to talk about ALC, or assembly load context, and essentially why I believe, and this is just a personal opinion, that there are some issues with how we've implemented authentication in PowerShell and in the modules that we use, including the first-party modules. We'll talk about the problems with that. We'll also talk about how MSAL works on different languages and sort of, when it's done correctly, how nice the experience of authenticating can be. And then once we get past that, we're going to look at, well, is there any way that we can avoid using the Microsoft Authentication Library? And then finally, we're going to follow up with, should we avoid using the Microsoft Authentication Library? We're going to go into a couple of fairly common examples where because, again, as I said, I don't think you should ever really do this, but there are sometimes some very rare scenarios where it is helpful to know how all this works. And we are, if anything, we are a room full of people who like to break things and figure out how they all work. So this is more an exercise in understanding how all the cogs turn, not a tacit endorsement of doing this in production, because you can run into some problems with it. All right. So again, I think my stance on this is pretty clear. I still think that the Microsoft Authentication Library is the greatest of all time. It makes authentication really, really, really simple. But sometimes when we are trying to do things in PowerShell, the implementation of MSAL can get a little bit weird. So before we get into how it gets weird, I just sort of want to show what happens with MSAL when it just works. So because the Microsoft Authentication Library is kind of like the underlying fabric of how we basically do everything with cloud native solutions, it's cross-platform. It's not just a PowerShell thing. It's not just a .NET thing. It has been forked and written by Microsoft for a large number of languages. So, I primarily write in sort of .NET and PowerShell on my sort of day-to-day, but I also dabble in a couple of other languages just for fun. So I just want to show you how this looks when we're using MSAL in an environment that just works, just to show you how simple authentication can be, because I still believe, in the year of our Lord 2025, people still think this is an overwhelming thing to sort of understand. So let's just dive in and I'll show you a couple of examples of how this looks. So the first one here is just in Python. It's nice and simple. I always like to say that authentication is really just 2 lines of code. Obviously, this isn't 2 lines of code, but most of this is just syntactic sugar. We're creating a couple of variables: client ID, tenant ID, authority, and scopes. And then we've got the two magic ones. So we've got our apps. So we're going to create a public client application, which is literally just URL forming with a client ID and the type of authority we want to use. Once we've got our application, we then pop over to, it's not going to work. This would have worked really cool. I blame PowerPoint on Mac. That'll pop down to the results section where we use that app to acquire a token, either interactively or silently, or one of the myriad other solutions that we can use. But for these demos, we're just doing interactive authentication. So we're providing the scopes for what we want to do. In this scenario, hey, I just want to get all of the Graph API permissions that I'm allowed to use against this specific client ID. And then based on that, we're going to get an access token as a result, and then we can go and do the things that we need to do with that code. Similarly, if we go and have a look at another language, pun probably intended, Go, we've got the same concept, right? So we're creating our client, so a new client with the client ID and authority, and then the codes, the animation is not going to work today, but it will pop down now to the result, where we go client, acquire token, interactive. So again, acquire token, interactive. If we go back to Python, acquire token, interactive, it's written slightly different, but the language is exactly the same. So you should understand what's happening here. Exactly the same deal though. Once we get that, as long as we don't get an error, we get an access token that we can then go and do our magical graph calls with. Similarly, PowerShell-ish. This was something I did a couple of years ago now, where I wanted to write the most native PowerShell solution to do an authentication request. And basically, because PowerShell is a beautiful wrapper over the top of .NET, we can just use the libraries that are available. So you can do this today. You can download the Microsoft Identity Client library, add that type to your session, and then you can start writing things just as if you were doing it in .NET, which I think is one of the many powerful things of PowerShell, is that you basically get to write like C# or .NET code and not worry about compiling it. You just get to sort of test it out and see how it goes. So I really think it's a great sort of stepping stone into building something bigger and greater as well. So hopefully showing how simple this is, explains a little bit around how I think MSAL is really good. So I want to just go back to sort of what I was saying before. So one of the problems that I've found with kind of, it only really affects us in the PowerShell world, and that is specifically because the first-party libraries or modules that we use for authentication have all decided that they are going to roll their own or include their own assemblies or libraries in their modules. So when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about the AZ modules, which use their own version of MSAL, which is actually the Azure or AZ Identity Library, which is just MSAL with a whole bunch of extra functionality on top. And then say the MS Graph libraries, which include their own copy of the version of the Microsoft Identity Client that they use. Now, I would assume at this point, because I can't get any feedback from anyone while I'm looking at my screen, is that we all know what the assembly load context issues are in PowerShell. For those that don't know, essentially what happens is if I open a session in PowerShell, start doing some work with the MS Graph module, and then I also at the same time decide to cut across in the same session and do some work with the AZ module, and I import both of those modules. If the AZ module has a newer or earlier version than the version of the MSAL library that was imported from the MS Graph library, we're going to run into some problems. And this can either be silently failing, it can be a wall of red text, or it can just send you the wrong information and not actually tell you why it failed. This is a known issue. The sort of the ACL problem is known, is documented, and is solvable. However, to solve this, it requires the actual maintainers of the modules themselves to rewrite their modules to support ACL sort of overriding. Justin Borean, one of the great speakers from PSConf EU 2025, has actually got a really good article online, and he's done some videos about how the ACL stuff can be overwritten. But at the end of the day, for people who are simply consuming this, it's not within our wheelhouse that we can actually rewrite these things, nor should we. The real solution here is to follow what all other languages do, and that is to create a first-party module kind of like the MSAL.ps module was, even though that was officially, unofficially not a first-party module. But we just need to create one module to rule them all, and then all other modules need to import that or require that as an import. What that means is that hopefully everyone starts just using one central auth library, and then we can potentially lower that risk of the ACL issues that we run into PowerShell. So that's kind of where the idea of this session came into. So, maybe you have a workload that requires some of, MS Graph and AZ modules, and you've run into those problems, and you've gone, well, I'm a smart guy. Can I just write my own? So the short answer is yes, you absolutely can. The even shorter response there is I really don't think you should. But this session is really about showing you what you can do and not telling you off if you decide to do that. So we're just going to go right in, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of this. And then I'm just going to open the floor for questions. Or if you've got any experiences of doing this yourself, I'd be really curious. I have a few examples. I'm probably not going to get through all of them. So I'm probably just going to rush through them. But as I said, all the code is available on my GitHub. It's available today under just the PSConf EU 2025 repository. So you can definitely go and grab that and start breaking things in production if you so feel inclined. Okay, so that's my slides done. Let's pop over to my code. So in here, I've got 4 examples. I've got the most common things that I find that people need to do. So the first one here is essentially interactive authentication. And just really quickly, if anyone has me on Signal and thinks that this screen needs to be bigger, can you please send me a message? Otherwise, I'm going to keep it. I think Yup has told me that it's good, so I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so Auth code flow is basically interactive authentication. Now, I spent quite a lot of time working on this to be the most secure way to write your own interactive authentication mechanisms that follow what you get for free if you use the MSAL libraries. So I've just got a bunch of things in here, some variables that I need. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to load these in. Okay. Now, down here is actually how you would do this in Graph. Again, kind of, my 2-line magic solution is how I sort of do this stuff. So what you would do is you'd say connect MG Graph, and then that gives you an instance. Now, I have thoughts, feelings on the Microsoft Graph module. I don't particularly use it in my day-to-day. And one of the smaller peeves that I have is that it really does try to sort of treat you like you don't need to know what that token is. The cool thing is because you're basically just doing HTTP calls, you can't really hide that stuff. So if you did want to extract the access token from a Connect MG graph, there's this handy dandy little one-liner here that allows you to basically invoke an MG graph request and then just strip out the header, grab that authorization, and then you can go and do things. Is this correct? I mean, it works. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. There's really not a huge amount of scenarios where you would need to directly get the token if you're using the MG graph thing, but just to know it's there is kind of handy. Okay, so now we've got this 2-line thing to get a token. How would that look like if we weren't relying on any other libraries? Well, it gets a little bigger. So I've got a bunch of functions in here that I'm not going to expand out a great deal, but essentially the things that make this secure is we have this PKCE flow, or proof of key code exchange, which is basically like having a private key and a public key, or a challenge and a verifier secret, that when you send out that request for the token, it comes back to you with the challenge or the verifier, and then you basically just need to decrypt it, and only you, the person that made that request, can decrypt that token. So it makes that sort of bounce of authentication and identity as secure as possible. So I did not write this. I grabbed this from a blog post and just sort of made it more readable. But we're basically just building challenge and verifier codes, and then we just return them. Interesting to look at if you do get a chance, but it's definitely not something we need to focus on today. State value is actually something that we don't need to use anymore. This was an older method that we had. Instead of having PKCE, we would simply just put a secret word in the request, and as long as that came back, we were happy. Then we build our own HTTP listener because we basically need to sit there and wait for the token to come back. And then we have a function to sort of wrap everything up in that authentication request. Not a great deal to this. We've got an authority, a token authority, our scopes, a couple of little handy functions so that I can get things like offline access, so I can get a refresh token and things that MSAL kind of hides from you. But because we're not using MSAL, we can kind of do what we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and load all this in. I'm going to show you what that experience looks like. Okay, and we'll just go here. And it's going to bounce me over here. We're going to go through a little auth dance. Maybe. So straight away, interesting, it's tried to use my PatchMyPC account. That's funny. I will try and let's go here. Is it gonna do it properly? Bin. Yes. We'll try that one more time. Doing demos on work devices is never recommended. It looks a little better. Now, I did design this to intentionally. No, it's still using my bin and PatchMyPC. That's great. Okay, so what I was going to show you, and I'm having some demo god issues because I didn't have any beer today, is that it was going to fail because in my app registration, if I can bring this up, let's have a look here. BSConfU, authentication. So what most people do when they're creating an app registration in Azure, especially in the PowerShell community that we are part of, we just create localhost and we do all our testing locally. In this scenario, though, I was creating a scenario that actually our front-end team needed an app registration and they do single-page application. So they've kind of stolen localhost from us and we can't use localhost. So just a quick handy tip, because, wow, I'm actually running out of time already, which is great, is that to use localhost over multiple different types, you can actually add additional parameters to the URI. So in this scenario, to make this work, again, it's not going to work for me today. I've gone ahead and just put localhost/PWSH. One of the neat things about this is that means you can have as many different applications bouncing off localhost. So you could use one application registration to do multiple different things. The other neat thing is the port number in a redirect URI is considered a wildcard when localhost exists, because the assumption here is that this is local development. So you do not need to put that port number in. So it really sort of opens that up. So you would just basically put in PWSH, the backslash is important, and then that redirect would work for you. Okay. I'm going to go through device code flow. I'm not going to do, well, I can do the dance and show you. This one's a little simpler because there's kind of less to it, but I'm just going to go ahead and select this. No, I'm going to have to bin this again. Sorry. Okay, load this in. So again, my two-line solution of how this is done using the AZ account. So connect AZ account, tenant, and use device authentication. And then we can grab the access token based off MSGraph and get that token. What it looks like without using any of those libraries, we need to create that request for a device code. We then actually run that, and then we get the response back, and we put that device code out into the clipboard. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this and see what happens. We'll run the whole thing. Okay, so device code has been copied to the clipboard, which is awesome. It's what we like to see. And then I'm going to, unfortunately, I have to run all of this, but we're basically just going to go to the device login flow, and we're going to watch for the response on that flow. So I'm just going to hit F8. This pops up. I've got my device code. It's already in my clipboard, which is nice and neat. I'm then going to go through and do the auth dance. And there was my problem. I'm going to have to yell at my admin. We'll just do the auth dance here. Yes. Eventually. Okay, that looks like that has finished. Awesome. So I've got my token type, my scope expired, extension expires, and access token. So this is a way that we can do that device code flow. It's not the most secure way to do things, but if you are in scenarios where you're running this on a headless unit and you need to be able to get that code, this is a really good way of doing it. I think the catching the device login and capturing that device code and putting it in the clipboard is a sort of a nice little thing. I was pretty happy when I figured that out. But this is one way that you can get that token without using MSAL. I'm going to quickly brush past the client secret flow because I do want to show you one last thing that I actually think is insane, and I'm really upset that I didn't get to show you guys this year at PSConf EU. So client secret flow is exactly the same as we did before. However, we're going to chuck a client secret in the app registration. You can see a way that you can do that in a AZ accounts method, but the sort of the big bad no MSAL solution is actually kind of simple. We just hit the Microsoft Online based on your tenant, client ID, client secret, scope, grant type is client credentials, and then you're just providing that client secret in the request. This is a HTTPS request, so the man-in-the-middle attacks are lowered, but you still are passing a secret over as a request each time. So there is a chance that there's some concern there. I'm not a big fan of using client secrets on app registrations. If you're going to do that sort of stuff, I always recommend that you use certificates because they are more secure. All right, so I'm going to jump straight into the last demo. This is the managed identity flow. Now, managed identity is something that I'm going to be talking about for a really long time. In fact, I have a bunch of really interesting sessions about that next year that hopefully get accepted. But today I've just got this neat demo that who knows whether it's going to work or not. But essentially, for those who don't know, a managed identity or a workload identity federated request with a managed identity is a new solution that allows us to essentially use the identity that exists in a resource that has a managed identity to then go and request access to an app registration, which is either a single tenant or multi-tenant. What's neat about this is there is no passwords. It is simply an identity that already exists that has implicit trust between the app registration and the service or the resource that it is running on. That sounds complicated because it kind of is hard to explain, but it essentially means that a trusted resource can go and do things on behalf of an app registration. So this is the most common scenario that I put in as a boilerplate thing in my function apps that I run in PowerShell. So, if we do have that managed identity that exists, then I'm going to go ahead and use the AZ access token to grab the token using this specific resource, which is important for workload identity federation. We're then going to connect to a tenant, not necessarily the one that we're on, but one that has already been registered with that app registration with that federated token. And then we're going to swap that out for, as an example, the MS Graph resource. So this is really neat, a really, really small boilerplate solution that you can use today. If you weren't using any of those libraries, well, this is exactly how you do it yourself. I've written a blog post this over at powers-hell.com. So I'm not going to go into it a great deal, but understand that the actual request flow itself is relatively simple. Setting up the workload identity connection is also relatively simple, and I'm more than happy to sort of show off this after the session. I just want to go in and show you the actual working example if it's going to let me. So let's do this. So I'm over in Björn's tenant. He's graciously let me set up a function app with an app registration and a managed identity that I have registered in my own personal tenant. Just to quickly show you, because I have about 6 minutes left, I'm going to go into settings because last time I showed this off and asked people if they'd set up managed identities, I had about half the room not put their hand up. So I want to try and change that today. So if we go into identity here, it's really, really easy to set up a system assigned identity. You just say, I would like one, please. You get the object principal ID. This is something that you need to remember for the connection to the app reg. But then you don't need to do anything else. That just exists. And this system assigned identity lives for as long as this function app lives. So if I go ahead and delete that resource, this managed identity also goes away. So it's nice and secure. So if anything bad happens to the function app, you can sort of bin it very quickly. I have a little bit of time, so I can sort of show you how the connection between the app registration looks. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Applications, app registrations. Okay, so this is my multi-tenant app. I've registered this in my personal tenant, but I just want to show you how the workload, the federated credential looks. So again, remember we made a copy of the object ID of the service principal, or the managed identity rather. So we've just gone ahead and said, okay, well, the issuer of this is Microsoft, and the tenant is the tenant that we're connecting to, and the object ID of the managed identity that should be allowed to get access to this app registration is this. That's all you need to do. There's nothing else to this. We're literally just saying this managed identity should be allowed to get a token. Here's proof of what it is. You can go and do the rest. This makes this unbelievably simple. There are no passwords. There's just trust between the two different things. That's the most important thing. It's no longer proving credentials. It's just proving trust between two resources. Okay, so let's go back to this demo. I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to show you it run. Okay. So in this example, I've just got a field here called tenant ID. I'm going to put in my one because I'm cool like that. I don't know my own tenant ID, but the domain also works. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. We'll just wait for a moment and then I'll paste the output into VS Code and we can see all my secrets. And again, remember this is running in Björn's tenant, not my own. The only thing that I've done here is I've set up trust between the managed identity in Björn's tenant and the app registration, and then registered that app registration in my own tenant. Okay. And if I paste that, I get all the device information from my tenant, from Björn's tenant, without any passwords or certificates being stored or needed to be managed by myself. So what this does mean for anyone running MSP workloads, you can now have those workloads running in a super secure manner without having to worry about leaking secrets and passwords. So I think that's kind of neat. That is the end of my session.